record this meeting so that if you want to go back at a later date and watch some of the stuff that we go over class tonight, again, kind of on your own time, then you will be more than welcome to. All right, so this week we're starting off, like I said, talking about some of these different types of relationships that organisms have with each other besides just eating each other. And they kind of fall under the broad category that scientists call symbiotic relationships. So these are relationships when two individuals live in very close proximity or have lifestyles that kind of intertwine with one another. That's where these symbiotic relationships come from. Okay, let's see. Okay. So the first part of this type of relationship, the symbiotic or symbiosis, refers to different species that live together in a close relationship. So again, it's important to point out that these are different species. So this isn't like siblings living together or one big group of elephants or zebras or something like that. So in order to be a symbiotic relationship, it has to be between different species, different groups of organisms. Additionally, those species have to have some sort of relationship with each other. There has to be some sort of interaction between those two species as part of kind of their normal daily life. So the word itself, symbiosis, is kind of actually made up of two different parts. The sym means like together, like at the same time. And then obviously bio is relating to life, like biology, like the class that you are in right now with Mr. Stanley, is the study of life. And so symbiosis is living things that are together in some way or another. So there are three major types of symbiosis that we are going to cover tonight. And each one of them can kind of be represented using like a plus sign, meaning like it's a good relationship, a minus sign, meaning it's a bad relationship, or a zero, meaning that there isn't a whole lot of interaction or relationship happening between that species. So the first one that we're going to talk about is mutualism, which is where both species, so like species A and species B, both benefit from this relationship. So it's good for everybody all around. There is commensalism, which is where one species benefits and the other one isn't really affected in any way or another. And then finally, the one that you've probably heard about before without maybe specifically hearing this word would be like parasitism. So this is where one species benefits, but in the process, it harms the other species. One species has a negative aspect of this relationship. It is being harmed by the fact that species A is here getting some sort of benefit. So these are kind of the main relationships, the main types of symbiosis that we are going to cover today. So we're going to talk about what these mean and then go through a whole bunch of examples. Mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. So, mutualism, both species are happy. They both get a plus, they both benefit. So a mutualism or a mutualistic relationship is one where both organisms benefit. They're both helping each other out. Species A does something to help species B. Species B does something to help species A. It's like a mutual friendship, kind of. So a plus-plus relationship, we could call it. Both species benefit. Both have a positive outcome from this relationship. So you could think of it like a friendship, like with your best friend, where wherever you're hanging out with each other, you both are having like a great time. Or like think about if you own like an apartment or something, and your best friend is going to come visit for a couple weeks, and they're super fun, and you guys are going out, you're staying in, you're making stuff. They always help you like clean up afterward. They even offer to pay for like a little bit of the rent for the time while they're staying there. They get to stay in your place and have a great time going around the city, and you're showing them all the sights and sounds. So everybody has a super fun time. So mutualism is like the win-win kind of situation. Everybody benefits. Everybody is helped out. So in the natural world, this can take a ton of different kind of shapes and sizes. So in this acacia tree, which is a type of tree in Africa, it has these big kind of rounded parts on the tree that are hollow. They're called galls. And there's a species of ant that lives inside of these galls. When an herbivore comes to chew on some of the leaves from the acacia tree, the ants come out and start biting and stinging it. Or when some other insects, like some beetles or something, come along and start trying to eat the tree, the ants will come out and defend the tree. They'll fight off and bite and sting anybody who tries to eat the branches of the acacia tree. So the ants are benefiting because they're getting these nice kind of covered places to live out of the elements, and they don't have to do any building. The tree makes the homes for them. The tree benefits because the ants help protect it. They're its own like personal bodyguard, its own personal secret service. They're scaring away any species that are going to come try and eat those branches or eat those leaves. So that's what makes it a mutualism, a mutualistic relationship. The ants are helped and the tree is helped. So both benefit, both are helped, and that is what makes it a mutualism. Some other really well-known mutualisms that you may have seen out in your everyday life include flowers and their pollinators, things like bees and hummingbirds. So the reason why the bees and hummingbirds are coming and visiting all of these flowers is because the flowers have nectar, which is basically like a little bit of sugar water that these animals use for energy. That is like their main food source, is the nectar inside of these flowers. And so the hummingbird is going to eat it to keep up its energy. The bee is going to eat some of it, but then take a whole bunch back to the hive and turn it into honey. And so these guys benefit because they get food from the inside of these flowers. The flowers are very happy when these bees and hummingbirds come to visit, because when they come, they pick up some pollen from the flower. And then when they go to the next flower, they'll lose a little bit from the first flower and pick up some from the second flower. And then they go to the third flower and they lose a little bit from the second flower and pick up some from the third level flower. This is what actually pollinates the flowers, which is what's needed in order to grow new seeds and reproduce. You can't make any new flowers if they don't get pollinated. And so instead of some other plants, which just rely on putting a whole bunch of pollen out in the wind and hoping it lands on the right flower, instead, these are attracting these pollinators to come and get a little bit of that nectar. And then when they go flower to flower, that pollen gets dropped off and spread. So the flowers benefit because they're able to reproduce and make more flowers. And the pollinators benefit because they get food. They get this nice, sweet food resource in the form of nectar. So flowers benefit, birds and bees benefit, so it's a mutualistic relationship. Both are helped out in this situation. Another really common one has to do with like cleaner species. So there's some little fish in coral reefs called cleaner fish that will go around and pick out all of the little dead bits of plants and animals from other larger fish, like this eel, for example. So this eel will open its mouth and the little cleaner fish will hop in there and start eating away at some of the little dead particles and old pieces of flesh, basically acting like a toothbrush for this eel. So the eel and other animals like it benefit because they get all of this kind of gross dead stuff out of their teeth and helps their teeth stay clean and healthy. And the cleaner fish get food, right? This is how they make their living essentially in terms of eating. They eat sort of the leftover bits that are stuck to the teeth of these other fish. So the eels benefit, the cleaner fish benefit, so it is a mutualism. Another one that has plants and animals coming together to kind of help the plants spread and reproduce is with things like fruit and berries produced by plants. So the reason why plants produce things like berries is that the inside of the berries has seeds. And so the plant doesn't just want all of its seeds to be dropped right at its roots so that all of a sudden 30 berry plants are going to start growing in its space. It wants to spread out over the environment. It wants berry plants spread far and wide to take advantage of all the space. If you haven't noticed, plants not so great at moving. Once they're in place, they're basically stuck there for the rest of their lives. Animals, very good at moving. It's kind of like one of the hallmark things that they do is they are animated. They move around. So by producing these small berries that animals eat, the seeds are usually hard enough to survive the digestive system of the animal. So when the animal poops out the seeds someplace later on, now the seeds have been moved to a new area, a new location, where hopefully there'll be a little bit less competition from their berry brothers, and they'll be able to start growing and reproducing in that area. So the animals get food because they're eating the fruits and berries that are being produced, so they're getting the energy from that. And the plants benefit because their seeds are being dispersed over the wide area. One of my favorite stories that relates to this has to do with the spicy chemical capsaicin. So capsaicin is the chemical that is put on spicy foods in order to make it taste spicy. It tricks your mouth into thinking that there's something very hot on your tongue. So capsaicin is found in things like peppers. So like jalapenos or habanero peppers have a lot of capsaicin inside them. The reason why they do is because mammals, when they eat the peppers, they actually digest the seeds, so they break up the seeds, but birds do not. So the reason why peppers are spicy is because birds cannot taste spicy things. They don't have the sensors for the capsaicin in their mouths. So birds can eat jalapenos and habaneros all day long and feel just fine. And the seeds are able to survive inside of the birds and be pooped out somewhere else. Mammals, on the other hand, when they eat jalapeno peppers, you feel the spice, right? For most people, it's painful. They don't like it. And so this way, the peppers prevented themselves from being eaten by mammals and helped to make sure that only birds ate them to disperse the seeds. And then humans came along and were like, hey, this thing that burns my mouth when I eat it, I like it. I want to eat more of it. And so we kind of got in the way of that whole evolutionary plan But luckily, we liked them so much that we decided to start growing our own peppers. So it worked out for the end in the peppers. But the reason why they became spicy initially is because they wanted to be eaten by birds and not by things like monkeys or deer or stuff like that. So just a fun little ecology story about how some things can be beneficial and some things cannot be. Another example of sort of a cleaner type of relationship is something like an oxbird. So these guys are really common in savannas and jungles of Africa, where they land on the big herbivores like antelope and gazelle and elephants and stuff like that. And they peck off little mites and ticks and stuff that got on the mammal and eat them. So the oxbird is getting food and the mammal is getting rid of these nasty parasites that are attaching to it. So they both are helped out. It's a mutualistic relationship. Mammal gets rid of some nasty bugs. Bird gets a nice little snack. One that happens at sort of the microscopic level that's also important for us to a lesser extent is that a lot of big herbivores, so things like cows and deer, have special bacteria that live in their stomach. And these bacteria help them break down the tough plants and grasses that they eat as part of their normal diet. And so with this bacteria in their stomach, these cows and deer and stuff like that can eat a whole wide range of plant matter. And obviously the bacteria in there that are breaking down these plants are also getting some of the nutrients from it. So they have to be there in order for these guys to be able to eat the way they do. But those bacteria also benefit from being there because they get a free ride and free access to nutrients. So they help the animals break down the plants, and then they get some of the nutrients as the plants go through the digestive system and sort of their broken down state. All right, so those are all relatively kind of straightforward examples of mutualism, situations and systems where two plants or animals are working together to help each other. They're both getting some sort of benefit out of their relationships. So does anybody have any mutualism questions so far?
No.
All right. Thank you. Doesn't sound like it. So that one is probably kind of a pretty straightforward one to understand. This guy's helping, it's all great. The next situation is a little bit more different, a little bit kind of more unusual. It's called commensalism. And this is a situation where one species benefits, so they're being helped out in the relationship, while the other species is kind of unaffected. They don't really notice that the first species is there, or they don't really care. It's not hurting them at all. And so one species is being helped, and the other one doesn't really mind. It doesn't really notice. It's just kind of there. So that's where like this idea of a +0 relationship comes in. One species is helped, and one isn't really affected. Nothing really good or bad is happening to them. It's just kind of going on. So this would be, I kind of like to think of it if like your friend or your cousin says, oh, hey, my buddy is going to be in Austin for a couple weeks. Can they stay at your place? And you're like, yeah, sure, that's fine, I guess. And so they come and they stay in like your guest bedroom, and you never really see them. They're always kind of in their own room or out. They're very clean. They cook and clean all of their own dishes, so you don't really have to do anything for them. And they pay you exactly the amount of rent that you agreed upon in the first place. but they don't really hang out with you. They don't really do anything extra to help you out around the apartment. They're just kind of there doing their own thing. So they're getting a place to stay while they're in this new city, but you're not really being super helped or harmed by their presence. They're just kind of hanging out at your place. Half the time, you don't even really notice that they're there until you see some clean dishes in the dishwasher that weren't there before. So a pretty common example that if you ever go whale watching or watch like a lot of nature documentaries, you may have seen before. And that is the fact that a lot of times whales, right, everybody's familiar with whales, huge, giant marine mammals, have these little shellfish kind of things that are attached to them called barnacles. So these barnacles are sort of kind of related to things like clams and oysters and mussels and stuff like that. And they like to attach themselves to whales because when they do that, they're able to move throughout their environment and go into different kind of nutrient-rich areas. Instead of being like most clams and mussels where you're stuck in one place for your whole life, these guys are able to move around and experience a wider variety of areas that might be a little bit better and have more nutrients in them. The whale, it doesn't hurt the whale to have these barnacles on it. They're not like sucking the blood. They don't make it any harder for the whale to swim because they're super tiny and small compared to the whale itself. So they're just kind of there for the whale. It doesn't really notice, doesn't really care. It keeps on living its own whale life to be happy big whale. But these barnacles get a free ride and are able to be brought around the ocean to these different nutrient-rich areas. So the barnacles are helped out by being moved around by the whale. Whale doesn't really care that they're there, doesn't really notice. So that's what makes it commensalism. One is helped, and the other one just kind of is like, okay, that works for you, I guess. So a lot of times you'll see this when plants or animals kind of make use of parts of the landscape that already exist. Like this owl or squirrels that'll make use of like a tree branch that's been broken off and hollowed out by the elements, right? They did not directly hurt the tree, right? This happened during like a storm or something. And then this owl or squirrel or chipmunk or whatever it is just kind of moves in and takes advantage of that open space. So the tree isn't really being hurt by them or harmed by them. It just has this open area naturally. But the owl or the squirrel or chipmunk or whatever it might be has this nice living area for it to stay out of the elements and protect itself. Same things with certain orchids, especially ones that live in rainforests, right? Orchids are these very beautiful flowers, and they like to grow on top of trees. Now, they don't cover up the tree. They don't suck away any of the nutrients from the tree. They don't block the sunlight from the tree. They just kind of like to use some of the tree branches as a starting place to grow up into the sun. So again, they're not really hurting the tree. They're not providing any nutrients to the tree. They're just kind of using the tree as a platform. So it's all commensalism. One species using these different parts of the tree in order to help themselves, but they're not hurting the tree in the process. Another great example are these egrets, which are these little white birds that a lot of times in like prairies and grasslands and savannas, you'll see them hanging around very close to big herds of things like cattle or buffalo or bison. And these guys are not exactly like the oxbirds from earlier. They are not eating the little bugs that live on the cows. They like to eat the little bugs that live in the grass. The problem for the egrets is that the little bugs that like to live in the grass are very good at hiding in the grass. And they're very good at kind of getting underneath and staying out of the birds' mouths. Luckily for the birds, when these big lumbering cows move through an area, all of the little crickets and grasshoppers and leafhoppers and stuff like that all start jumping up out of the grass to get away from being stepped on by a cow. So while all these little bugs are jumping around to get out of the way of the cow, these egrets come in and just kind of pick them out of the air. Yum, 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 yum. Because now it's really easy for them to find them. They're jumping around all over the place. So the cows aren't really being affected by the birds at all, right? They're going to move through this area anyways. Doesn't matter to them. But the birds are using the fact that the cows get all the insects all riled up and jumping around to come in and score an easy dinner. So the cows aren't really being affected. They don't care about the bugs or the birds. But the birds are getting a big plus by getting some easy food. So commensalism. One group is helped out. The other one doesn't really care either way. Clownfish, another popular example, especially after Finding Nemo came out. Like, if you remember at the beginning of the movie, Nemo and Marlin, the dad, are hanging out inside of the anemone because it's safe there. And Marlin starts out, he doesn't really like to go outside the anemone because he's scared of the open ocean. And clownfish are able to live inside of the sea anemone because they have a special coating on the outside of their scales. Normally, the anemone would sting. It has little stingers that would sting animals that try to come in and eat it. Luckily, the clownfish has that special layer, so it doesn't feel the stings. It can survive inside of the anemone just fine. It's not trying to eat the anemone or hurt it. It also isn't like bringing in any extra food for the anemone. It's just using it as protection. So the anemone isn't really being affected one way or the other, but the clownfish gets a nice, super safe place to live. So commensalism. One isn't really being affected, but the other one is getting a big benefit to their life. And finally, a really great example of commensalism are these little remora fish. So if you've ever watched like any Discovery Shark Week or seen any like ocean documentaries, there's a very good chance that you've seen a shark swimming along and it has one or two of these little fish hanging out right underneath it, really close to the mouth area. And you probably thought, man, that is one brave little fish to be hanging out so close to the mouth of a shark. What you probably didn't realize is that there is a reason why this guy is staying so close. So remora fish look super weird. If you ever look up a picture of one, the top part of their head right here is basically like one big suction cup. So they basically suction themselves to the bottom of the shark. So when sharks eat food, when they go and tear off a big piece of fish or something like that, you know, they grab it, they wiggle it around, they scarf down what they can. But there's almost always little scraps of torn up fish guts and stuff that doesn't quite make it inside of the shark. Well, by hanging around really close to the shark's mouth, the remora is able to really quickly kind of dart in and eat up those little bitty scraps that the shark wasn't going to go for anyways because it already got the big hunk. It doesn't need to bother trying to search out every single tiny little piece of fish. And so the shark isn't being hurt by the remoras. It's not like sucking the blood of the shark. It's not stealing food from the shark. It's just kind of hanging out, waiting for the shark to finish eating so it can come in and grab some of those little bits. The shark is also not being helped by the remora. It's not like the cleaner fish where it's going into the shark's mouth and taking out the little pieces. It's just kind of picking up the scraps that the shark wasn't going to eat anyways. So the shark is just doing its own thing. The remora is helped out by getting a nice free meal that it doesn't have to hunt for. It just waits for the shark to be done eating. So we have commensalism. One is helped, the other doesn't care. Yeah, remora looks super weird. They almost look like a weird upside down fish thing. And they have, like I said, they basically have like a suction cup on the top of their head that sticks them to the shark. All right, so finally, the one that you have probably heard about at some point in your life, especially if you've ever owned pets like dogs or cats, and that is parasitism. So in parasitism, a parasitic relationship is where one organism benefits, they're getting something good out of their relationship, but the species that it is living on, called the host species, is harmed. So this is where we are hurting the animals that we are living with. So we have the parasite is one organism and the host is the other one. So this is a classic plus minus relationship. The parasite is getting something, usually something like food or a meal out of it, but the host is hurting. They're usually getting like blood sucked or resources stolen from them, something like that. So imagine if like you had a friend way back in the day who's like, oh, I'm going to be in Austin for a couple months. Mind if I stay at your place? I can totally pay for a part of the rent. And you're like, okay, yeah, I guess that sounds fine. And then they come in and they're loud. They're playing music all night long. They constantly leave like their dirty dishes everywhere. So you're always having to clean up after them. When time to pay rent or utilities come, they're like, oh, bro, I totally got you. But like next week, I'm dealing with some financial, but I'll definitely pay you back someday. Can you just cover me this month? And so you cover them the first month and then the second month and then the third month. And so no matter how many times you ask, they never really pay you back for anything. You're constantly having to put an extra effort to pick up after them. That would be a classic parasitic relationship. They're getting a free place to stay and somebody who's cleaning and cooking for them, and they're not giving anything back in return. They're making that person's life harder. So this poor little fish here has these two big parasites on top of its fins. So these parasites are probably feeding on the fish's blood. And so the fish is losing that precious nutrients and energy to these big parasites living on top of it. Other classic parasites include things like fleas and ticks. So if you have a dog or a cat, this is why veterinarians really recommend that you give them a monthly like flea and tick, either like cream or pill or shot or something, so that they don't get these nasty guys on them when they're going for a walk. Again, these guys are getting a nice blood meal, whereas the dog or the cat is getting blood literally sucked out of them. They're getting the life sucked out of them by these parasites. There are plant parasites as well. So mistletoe, which like, you think about wintertime and it's like, oh, so cute. You have to kiss if you see the mistletoe. The actual plant itself is pretty hardcore. It's essentially a parasite of plants where it grows on and out of other trees and it sends its roots into the other trees. So it steals water and nutrients from the other plants while the tree has to not only support itself and its trunk standing up, but now it also has this mistletoe living on top of it and stealing its nutrients. Some classic parasites that we have to deal with in Texas, especially in the summertime, include things like mosquitoes. So, fun fact about mosquitoes, the male mosquitoes actually don't do any sort of blood drinking. They don't get any blood meals. It's only female mosquitoes that feed on hosts. And mosquitoes don't actually even use the blood directly for food. It's not like their main food source. It's actually the reason why only females consume blood is because they use the extra proteins and nutrients in blood in order to make their eggs. So it's not like a direct food source kind of thing. They rely on like plants and nectar, similar to, so most mosquitoes eat, it's kind of similar to pollinators, like things like plants and nectar or sugar from fruit that they can find And that's like their main meal, including for the females. But when it comes time to get ready to start mating and laying eggs, that's when the females are drawn to collect blood from other organisms so that they have those extra kind of nutrients and especially the protein in blood in order to help them out. But again, the mosquito is being helped out, and getting a mosquito bite is no fun. It hurts, it itches for a while, and you lost some blood in the process. So classic parasite. We talked about kind of ticks and stuff already. Ooh, kudzu tree, kudzu vine that we talked about in last week when we talked about invasive species. So not only is the kudzu an invader, it is also a parasite. It'll grow on top of trees and sort of strangle the resources of the tree in terms of the water and nutrients in the ground, while also covering up the tree and preventing it from getting any sunlight to get more energy. So it's using the tree in order to help climb and get itself up into the canopy where it can access the sun. And in the process, it is blocking out and destroying the tree from the outside, essentially. Ooh, so some particularly gnarly parasites include these insect parasites. So there are a group of species of wasps that lay their eggs on top of other insects. This particular wasp likes to lay its eggs on caterpillars. So the green part is the normal caterpillar, and all of these little white specks on it are wasp eggs. So when these eggs hatch, the larvae will bury down inside of the caterpillar and essentially start to eat it from the inside out. So they obviously kill the caterpillar in the process, but during it, it's a great kind of first meal for these little wasp larvae that are going to come out of these eggs. So also a great demonstration that nature can be pretty brutal sometimes. And so obviously these poor caterpillars are being extremely hurt / killed by this relationship. And the wasps are benefiting because their young are getting this really nutritious meal made out of caterpillar guts as soon as they come out of the egg. All right, so then some other classic parasites, especially for pet owners and even for humans as well, include internal. So a lot of the ones that we've been talking about so far have been external. So things like ticks and mosquitoes and wasp eggs, but there are also internal parasites, things like tapeworms and hookworms and stuff like that. So another group of organisms that you usually have about a once a month pill or chewable kind of thing that you have to give to your dog in order to prevent it from getting some of these different types of worms inside of it. So tapeworms like to attach inside of the digestive tract. And so basically, as the food is eaten and passed through the intestines, the worm absorbs a whole lot of those nutrients. So it takes the nutrients away from the dog or the cat or the person that it is inside of. So it can get pretty gnarly. There's also things called hookworms that are like smaller tapeworms that kind of just attach along the inside of the gut. And again, the only reason that they're there is literally to sit there and siphon off nutrients that the dog or the cat or the person eats. So they don't actually have to do any work in order to get the food. It just all kind of naturally comes through the guts of the organism into the tapeworm. So yeah, I'll get away from that picture pretty quickly because it can be pretty, those worms can be pretty nasty. All right, so does anybody have any more questions about any of those types of symbiosis that we just went over? The mutualism, the commensalism, or the parasitism.
Mr. Michael, this WS, it means yeah, like the name of it's W.
No, so that's just a reminder for me to show off the worksheet that is part of the daily assignment for today and for tomorrow. It's basically one big worksheet that I split up into kind of two sections, a Tuesday and a Wednesday section.
Okay, thank you.
So both the homework for today and the homework for tomorrow are basically set up in the same way, where there's going to be a series of scenarios, and then it's up to you to tell me, is this an example of a mutualism, a commensalism, or a parasitism? And so the part one is when it went up today. And so it might have some new scenarios. It might have some scenarios that hopefully sound a little bit familiar. So we have things like barnacles attaching to whales, ticks feeding on deer blood, storks cutting up animals it eats, and then bees eating the leftovers, ostriches and gazelles feeding next to each other, flowers and hermit crabs, and cuckoos dealing with their other organisms in their environment. So 7 different scenarios for you to kind of distinguish between, is this a mutualism where both species are being helped out? Is this a commensalism where one species is getting a benefit and the other one isn't really being affected? It's just sort of living its life as normal. Or is this parasitism where one species is being helped out, usually by getting some sort of meal, but the other species and their relationship is getting hurt in the process? So, I remember. The reason why there's that symbiosis worksheet on part slide is that for this first part, I made some pictures if you want to kind of see what these animals look like. Like if you don't know what an animal is that it's talking about and you want to see, I've added in some pictures of like the whales and the barnacles, the tick on the deer, the stork and the bees, the gazelle and the ostrich, the yucca plant and the yucca moth, a hermit crab inside of a snail shell, and a cuckoo chick in the nest of a bird. So the gray bird in this picture is actually the baby cuckoo who has taken over this nest. And the little kind of brown colored bird is the adult of the species that the cuckoo has taken over from. So there used to be some little baby, I think this might be like a sparrow, some little baby sparrow eggs in here, but the cuckoo baby has come in and made itself at home. So it's up to you guys for that scenario and the other 6 to tell me what type of relationship is being described. So as always, you can do that either on the Google form or the Google Doc version, whichever one works better for you. It's the exact same scenarios, exact same questions. And then that was today's assignment, so the assignment for Tuesday. And then the Wednesday assignment is the exact same, just with new scenarios. So buffaloes and cowbirds, silverfish and army ants, oxpeckers and rhinos, mistletoe and spruce, new scenarios, but still asking the same questions. Is this mutualism, commensalism, or parasitism? And again, that'll be tomorrow's daily assignment that you can complete for your attendance credit on Wednesday. Alrighty. Does anybody have any final questions on the relationships, the mutualism, commensalism, parasitism, or anything about the Tuesday or Wednesday assignments?
No, thank you.